Feeling like your brain doesn't quite fit the usual mould? Today, we're exploring how neurodivergent women can thrive, succeed, and feel understood in a world that's often built for neurotypical thinking.
By giving people psychological safety at work to be their true selves and not have to mask all the time, giving them more energy to actually contribute what they can is a really commercially valuable thing to do.
Hello, and welcome to the Wealth and Women podcast from the Personal Finance Society. I'm Emma Hall. In this episode, we're talking about neurodiversity and inclusion with a special focus on women, a topic that's only just beginning to gain the attention it deserves. Around 15 to 20% of the population is considered neurodivergent, which includes autism, AuDHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and more. Yet, many systems, from workplace to healthcare, are still designed with neurotypical norms in mind. So, what does true inclusion look like for neurodivergent women at work? What challenges do they face? And how can workplaces better support different ways of thinking? To explore this, I'm joined by my colleagues Alina Burlicue, Hazel Bowen and Tracy Brooks. Welcome, ladies.
Hello.
Hi, we're here again.
Here we go, again.
So this is an episode I've been really excited to talk about, particularly because I don't have a lot of personal experience with this. One of my biggest fears, which I think I've said to you all before, is I'm worried about putting my foot in it and not using the right terminology and not being aware and maybe having stereotypical views on things because I don't know any different. But we're very lucky because all three of our panelists today, all three of you have personal experiences. And I know you're all very excited to share your own views and experiences. Hazel, if we start with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
So you were diagnosed as neurodivergent last year.
That's
and I know
right.
you're very, very keen to raise awareness of it and making sure that people are aware and how to support people who are neurodivergent. So would you like to start by sharing your story?
Sure, thank you. So I am, as Emma said, I was formally diagnosed as AuDHD last year. AuDHD is autistic and ADHD, and it's quite common for those things to co-occur. That diagnosis happened a year after having a miscarriage. And that's a relevant point because it's something that obviously women have miscarriages. And it's the factor that brought the underlying ADHD and autism to the surface and made me realise I needed to find out what was going on. It's also one of the reasons that women typically find out later in life that they are autistic and have ADHD or other neurodivergent conditions, because they are influenced heavily by your hormones, particularly ADHD, which is to do with your hormones in your brain, and obviously your hormones to do with your reproductive system impact that. So that's why there's a lot of talk about women being overdiagnosed and an overdiagnosis at the moment, but it's just society catching up with the fact that these women were missed years ago when people assumed that only boys could be autistic and have ADHD.
So I think first of all, did you get to a point where you felt you needed a diagnosis? That would be quite interesting. And I know you're very keen on sort of research and looking back into the history around this and maybe some statistics that you'd like to share with us.
Yes. So following my miscarriage, I realised I was in a situation where suddenly I just couldn't do the things I had been able to do before. And when I say the things I've been able to do before, I mean things like organising myself, which previously I could do very well, managing my emotions, which also previously I could do very well. And I just knew it wasn't grief. A lot of people believed it was grief because obviously people don't understand neurodivergence and don't expect it. So I think externally people thought, Hazel's struggling. It's because she's just lost a baby. But it didn't feel like that. It was something biological going on in my body. So fortunately, I have private medical insurance. So I went to see a psychiatrist. He initially misdiagnosed me as having OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and potentially a mood disorder, either unipolar, which is depression, or bipolar, which is depression and mania. He then referred me on to see a psychotherapist, and just through chance, she is someone who worked a lot with autistic children. And in our first session, she said to me, probably within about half an hour, "Has anyone ever suggested you might be autistic? Because actually the thought processes you're describing to me and the behaviours that you explain you have and what I'm seeing now very much looks like autism." And it's something that I had believed was possible. There's autism in my family, and the previous diagnosis I've had throughout my life when I've had challenges in puberty, and also when I came off my hormonal contraception about 8 years ago, was always, you must be depressed. And that had never just felt like the right answer, because it always felt like what was happening to me wasn't coming from within me, but from the way I was responding to the world.
Mm-hmm.
So then I went through the process of getting a diagnosis formally, which for me was quite important, because having gone through that journey of trying to explain to people that something was not quite right and I needed more support, but without having the language to explain what it was, it's very difficult for people to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So I went through the diagnosis process. Fortunately, I paid for that privately, which I know is a huge privilege, because there's massive waiting lists for people to get diagnosed. And I got the news. It felt like the best news I've ever had, which I know might sound strange, but when you finally have a roadmap for understanding yourself, when I think I was 38, I was 38, after a lot of years of feeling like you were different, but you didn't know why, is really validating. So before I go on to sort of what happened after that, I'm going to take a step back onto the history. So a lot of women, as I said, don't get diagnosed until they're much older. And there has been this stereotype that it is a boy's illness or difference. I don't like the idea of calling it an illness, because it's just a difference. But that's based in historical research and the social norms of the times. So the oldest research into autism was actually in the 1920s. And it was from a lady who was in Eastern Europe. And so it wasn't familiar for the West. And she was picking up autism in sort of in the same proportions in boys and girls. But when the research that we know of all happened around wartime, you've probably heard of Asperger's syndrome, which is now autism ASD1, which is what I have, which is autism without learning disabilities. And the research that was done by Hans Asperger was all set within the context of the war and the Nazi era. And without getting too bleak and too much ingrained in history, essentially when he was doing his research, he was looking at people who had these autistic characteristics but could be useful members of society. If you think about that in the context of social norms, boys who are not that interested in talking to people and have social difficulties but are extremely focused and intelligent are useful to society. Girls, back in the day, who had those same characteristics were not that useful to society, because they were expected to be mothers and wives, and you couldn't do that if you were not able to engage. So the idea was that actually there were more autistic special boys than girls, but it was just that they were being looked at with a different set of criteria. I've been reading this about this in a book called The Lost Girls of Autism. I think it's by Gina Rippon, but we will put that in the show notes to make sure I'm correct. But that's some of the history, and it's again why a lot of women have been missed. So moving back to kind of my journey from diagnosis, I suppose quite naively, I thought, great, I have a language to explain how I see the world, and therefore everything's going to suddenly be much easier. But of course, just because you can explain it doesn't mean other people can understand it. And I've really been on a journey over the last year of understanding myself better, understanding and being more aware of how what I say is received by other people, and how when I describe my experience of the world or when I describe my feelings, that other people don't hear necessarily what I'm saying. And that's proven quite challenging in terms of trying to get, say, adjustments at work, because I present quite articulate when I explain that I'm struggling. And I think it's very difficult it would be difficult for any employer to say, well, there's this person sitting opposite me who looks absolutely fine, who sounds absolutely fine, and is incredibly articulately saying they need this extra support, when typically you would expect someone to be falling apart. But when you've been masking yourself and practicing, even subconsciously, how to appear as the perfect normal person for your entire life, you just have that mask all the time. And so it was a bit of a challenging journey, but I got there in the end. I think that's a really important point to cover, because one of the things I found most difficult on that journey was a kind of sense of hopelessness and loneliness, that I'd realized I was different and I thought it would be helpful, but actually it also made me realize that no amount of hard work was ever going to change who I am. And this is never going to actually get better. I just have to be more aware of it, and therefore put scaffolding around myself, and become more accepting of who I am. But one of the statistics I wanted to share, and why I think this is so important, is autistic adults without learning disabilities are 9 times more likely than the general population to die by suicide. Autistic women are 13 times more likely than non-autistic women to die by suicide. And there's lots of kind of theories around that, but one of the theories is that it's a very lonely and hopeless place to be if you need help and you can't get it. And that's from the medical profession, and that can be from employers. And I definitely got to a point last year where I felt quite hopeless. And fortunately, I was taken seriously and I got some adjustments put in place. They were just practical things that enabled me to worry less about certain aspects of how my autism or ADHD presents. And it's been absolutely life-changing for me. And without raising awareness, there could be other people going through this who don't get to the point where they have hope again. And, don't end up not here anymore. And that would be a bad thing for, the person and for the world, because neurodivergent people add interest to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a brave thing to do. It is, absolutely. You mentioned there that you've had some changes at work which have really made a difference, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of employers out there potentially, or people maybe that want to speak to their employer. What sort of changes made a difference to you in your workplace?
So not all autistic people and ADHD people are the same, and that's something that's really important for me to make clear. And so what works for me doesn't work for everybody. But also there are common characteristics. So I would liken that to, if you think about neurodivergence as people who are British, we're all British people are different, but there'll be times when something happens and we say, oh, that's so British, like how people are beat around the bush and stuff like that. So there are commonalities in our kind of the culture of our identity, if that makes sense. So I would say the typical things are communication style, emotional regulation, sensory sensitivities, and cognitive differences. So for me, the things that helped me feel more comfortable at work and have psychological safety to be my autistic self were things like, first of all, asking management, some people in management to go on neurodivergence training, which they did, which was great, because it gave them an insight into my way of communicating, so that we could try and meet each other halfway instead of me having to do all the work. And that was really important, both from a practical sense, but to feel like you are a valued person. And then there were some practical things. So having a desk in the 3 locations I work in, so that I don't have to, so from an autistic perspective, sameness is quite comforting. And because I travel a lot, so I travel around Norwich, Cambridge, London, I'm always on the go. So when I get somewhere, it's the same desk, same people, I can put my things on my desk. It might seem like so basic, and it probably does, but for me, it created a sense of stability and security and safety that was really helpful for my general well-being. And then things like having meeting agendas up front, so that you know what to expect in a meeting. I process things in a different way, and I like to think about things in advance if I can. And also having summary notes after meetings, so that I can reflect on what's been said. And I think that's quite an important point too, because when we think about adjustments, we think about things that will only benefit the disabled person. Anyone who's just listening to this, I did like air quotes while I said disabled, because I don't like to think of it as a disability. But actually having an agenda before a meeting and summary notes afterwards is actually pretty good just business practice, because there will be people who are not neurodivergent who find that quite useful and can prepare for the conversation. And so one of the things I've been talking at work about is inclusive by design. So instead of things being a special treatment for someone because they have a difference, how much of this can just be built into the way the business works anyway? So as many people can be included without having to put in a reasonable adjustment. And that's a really wonderful conversation going on at work at the moment. So there's been a lot of education in that respect, and it's nice to know that they're, open to this.
Yeah, that's really important, because that's, when we talk about that sort of thing and making changes, my first mind is, would a lot of employers go, well, if we make these changes for her, then we're going to have to make them for everybody else, and then it's going to be a big thing. But actually, like what you're saying, if you make that change, it may actually be easier for a lot of other people, not just you specifically. Might be a better business practice anyway to do it that way. So I think that's a really important point. It's interesting, isn't it? You had the late diagnosis. You've been masking for a long time by the sounds of it. Tracy, your son he's coming up to 7 this year.
Yeah.
He's just been diagnosed as, is it autistic?
I think
autism traits?
Yeah, autism traits. So he's been classed as neurodiverse. And for us, it was very much like when you have a child that, they do tests on a child. They ask the parent, has a child got eye contact? Yeah. Are they holding a pen properly? Yeah. So you can see what they're checking for the typical autistic traits.
Yeah.
And my son, fine, very, very intelligent. But for us, what it was at home, he's like the perfect child. But then when he got to school, we were getting phone calls saying your son's done this and that and the other. And we're like, gosh, this doesn't sound like our son. And we're trying to work with the school, what can work for him. But what we realised was, maybe he might be neurodiverse. So we thought, right then, let's go on let's get some sort of diagnosis. Now, it's so sad, but it takes 4 to 5 years for children to get a diagnosis. That's the waiting list.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary. And by then, the damage is done, because unless they have that diagnosis, and they're going to put that child on a different path of the naughty child path.
Yeah.
So
it's a whole school cycle, right? Primary, secondary,
absolutely,
through.
And the damage is done.
Yeah.
So we knew we had to kind of nip it in the bud. So we were in a fortunate position where we go, right then, let's go private. And it came out, that he is neurodiverse. And what we tried to do with the school was work with what worked for our son. So he likes, as you said, sameness. He likes structure. He likes to know what we're doing today. He likes to know ahead. He doesn't like surprises. He can handle a surprise, but he does like structure in his day. He likes to have a space where he is safe. And if he feels overwhelmed in a big room, they might just give him a colouring board just to kind of distract his mind. But initially, the school wasn't providing this, and we were having to work with the school. Come on, can you do this? And they were unable to do this sort of thing. So in the end, we had to make the decision, right, then we're pulling our child away from the school. And we were fortunate enough to find a school that were able to accommodate this. Now, what's amazing is because they've made these subtle changes, and I'm telling you, this subtle, it's the same teacher, not always like in his previous school, the teachers always changing. He didn't even know which teacher was going to greet him. So it was quite an intimidating thing. But by having these subtle changes with the same teacher, he knows where his safe space is. He understands emotions because they've educated him. He is now absolutely thriving in school. So all we've done is change the environment. We haven't changed him. We've just changed the environment now for him to thrive. And it hasn't been huge what we've had to, what the schools had to do, the new schools had to do. It's just been slightly subtle. And I think it goes back to what you were just saying with the workplace. Just slight changes for yourself. It's just going to make you more comfortable, and it's going to allow you to thrive.
Absolutely. And so it's really commercial. Coming back to what you were saying, Emma, about special treatment, I think that's something that employers struggle with because, particularly with the idea of hot desking, because let's face it, everyone would like to have their own desk, I think. That's not just a neurodivergent preference. But for someone who's neurodivergent, it can have a disproportionate impact on their energy levels because the amount they might worry about it. Or, I touched on it from an autism perspective, but from an ADHD perspective, when I'm traveling a lot, having a phone charger and having all the things I need at my desk, it might seem like basic. It's just loads of things I need to think about. And there's something called spoon theory, which really helps describe this. So if you think that all people have, say, 10 spoons of sugar as their energy per day, and for a neurotypical person, getting ready for work might take up 1 spoon of sugar. But for an ADHD person, it might take up 3 spoons of sugar. And so actually knowing that I've got things where they're supposed to be in the office, I don't have to use so much sugar before I come to work. And I have more sugar left to do my job.
Fantastic.
And so it makes business sense to help people. But it's also, when you think about something I know I discussed with you ladies before we did the podcast, the idea that it was the environment that needed to change, not your son. And the same for me. So it was the environment and the lack of certain aspects that would benefit me that were causing me to find certain things difficult. And there's different models of disability. There's the medical model of disability. And that is where there's a difference with somebody. They are the problem and they need to be fixed. And then there's the social model of disability. And the social model is somebody is different. Society has created boundaries and barriers. And if we remove those barriers, that person can fully participate in society without the challenges. That's the social model. So it's society creating the disability, not the person. And if we try and have that, and it comes back to inclusive by design, there's so much wonderful value. Not that I like to minimize people to the value they can add to society, because that's a problem in itself and for a totally different podcast, I'm sure. But there's so many wonderful characteristics you can get from neurodivergent people in the way we think, the way we communicate. So, I mean, just covering some of the positives that I think are important to take out of this are, as communicators, we are direct, generally, truthful even when it's difficult to be truthful, because we value honesty above all else. And I say that, I can't speak for all neurodivergent people, but this is a common characteristic. So that's really good in leadership. It's really good when working with clients, because it means you can more comfortably have some conversations that other people might shy away from. Yeah. Then there's the different ways of thinking. So typically, for example, with autism, autistic people typically are bottom-up thinkers. And that's where you need the detail to create the big picture. And that's really helpful if you're looking at perhaps putting in a new process or a new initiative in a business where autistic people, so non-autistic people or neurotypical people, are typically top-down thinkers. So if you've got a load of top-down thinkers thinking this is a great idea, let's implement, and then you've got someone who's a bottom-up thinker going, well, hang on, I've just listened to what you said. There's a gap in the process here, here, and here. Why don't we fix that now so that we don't have problems further down the line? I mean, that's a value add to the business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's just that diversity of thought. And so by giving people psychological safety at work to be their true selves and not have to mask all the time, giving them more energy to actually contribute what they can is a really commercially valuable thing to do.
Yeah, it's clear there are lots of advantages of having different people working in a business. And we talked briefly outside, and we're talking about a disability, and I said, do you think we should get rid of the term disabled disability because it sounds negative? And you actually raised a really important point which didn't come to my mind at all, and that was the legal aspect of it.
Yes. So although I don't like the idea that it's classed as a disability, as I've already mentioned, because it's different, and it's only a disability if that difference isn't accepted and there's barriers. The legal model is helpful because without it, employees can't ask for adjustments, or they can ask, but they can't expect adjustments. Yeah. And having that legal framework, so you can say, this is I am technically classed as disabled, which not all neurodivergent people are automatically disabled. To be classed as disabled under the Equalities Act, you have to have a condition that disables you, as opposed to just having a condition. Yeah. But that gives you access to being able to advocate for yourself and say, this will benefit me, and this is a reasonable adjustment because X, Y, and Z. So sadly, without that, there are probably businesses out there that would think, this is not our problem. We're not going to make the changes. Yeah. So currently, we need it to be a disability. Hopefully that will change.
Yeah, I'd like to think so.
But to me, it sounds like future-proofing a business, especially when it happens, like in your case, it's later. They've recruited you with all the qualities, with all the benefit, with all the value that you add, instead of suddenly a switch, and then you have ADHD. What does that mean for the business? It means that they need to make sure that they have everything in place for when these things happen. And actually, based on some of my clients' experience, is a common thing to experience the hormone imbalance leading to ADHD. So if that's the case, it makes absolutely business sense to future-proof your business, to actually put in place the means to accommodate this, to navigate this with the person, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, look at the value you've created for the company, the position you're in within the company as an absolute asset for the company. If they were to lose you only based on the fact that they can't retain you because they can't provide you with these things, where is the gain?
Yeah.
Right? So from a business point of view, for them to go outside and recruit someone on your position with your skills, with the value that you create, it would be much more costly than actually putting in place the small adjustments that they had to come up with in collaboration with you to make your life a little bit easier, so you can continue to add value for the company and for the clients, right? So to me, it's a bit of a no-brainer. And I think the scary bit is not knowing if that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? So again, you almost need to prepare for this, to have those conversations, to create that awareness. If that happens, what to look for. Because my son, my youngest, it hasn't been diagnosed. But he came over and said, "Mom, do you think I have ADHD?" And my question to you, what makes you think that? Because I wouldn't have picked up, because on the basis of he's bright, he's chatty, he's a chatterbox, he's all over the place, but that's my son, you know? So I would say that it wasn't like huge amount of, I can see huge amounts of signs, but gradually having that awareness, I'm like, oh, that looks like that, that looks like that, that seems like that. So for me, it's a bit of a worry, because he will get from a place where, like in primary school, they have one teacher, and the teacher, he's actually quite fun to talk to as a child, but that's when you have one person in charge, and they love all his quirks. He's funny, he's like engaging, dynamic. Yeah, they understand him. But he will go from primary to secondary, where they have like different teachers for different subjects. Some of the, the sciencey stuff is a sit down, focus. And I worry because I don't think the educational system has caught up with all of this. And it's interesting because I was talking to my husband the other day and said, do you find it interesting that there's been a surge in the diagnosed cases of ADHD? So if that's the case, what are we waiting for? Why does it have to be an abnormal thing? Why does it have to be a differentiator for a school like your son's school, current school, to say, we are doing things differently to accommodate this? It should be like an everyday thing,
Absolutely.
Right? Just like you put a ramp in place for a wheelchair, right? That is not like a compromise. It's a must.
It's an expectation
right?
these days when a building is built, I think.
Yeah.
And I think the statistics I saw was that 70% of people out of work are generally autistic. Is that the statistic? I think it was.
I believe so.
Yeah, so it's a high percentage. So it shows that the education system is lacking somewhere. And when I look at, in hindsight, when I think back when I was in school, I'm kind of thinking, there's a lot of children there that
I can think of a few. In my
but
school
they were put down the naughty.
Yeah,
or you're a naughty child.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, they weren't naughty. They were actually super intelligent, but they just weren't given the tools or the space to thrive.
It's not natural to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day or whatever it is in school, is it, for a lot of people? My brother really struggled with it at school. He's great with his hands. He likes to be hands-on learning. He's really bright, but hated school. Absolutely hated it.
And I think, if I remember when I went through school, everything was fairly abstract. There wasn't like, I look at how my kids learn these days and I'm thinking, wow, leaps and bounds. And it's amazing because you have different methods. Like in maths, they used to drive me insane with like, how many ways can you learn addition and subtraction? But it's a must. Like if you think about how the human brain works in so many different ways, I think it's great. I used to work with, he's actually still my coach. I don't think he minds mentioning it, Steve Moore. And he got to play for Seattle Hawks, and he actually coached for Seattle Hawks. And he said, the only reason why I got to that level of football playing is because I was classed as stupid, because he was dyslexic. And then back in the days, you couldn't read, you were stupid by default. He was sent outside to run. And the way he went through school was running. But he was one of the most clever people I've ever met. And his visual memory was outstanding. So even though he couldn't read properly, he was memorizing all these things. And he got to create business coaching programs, and he was like insanely successful. And since him, then I got more attuned to recognizing things, but actually celebrating all those differences that turned into strengths. And actually some of the best speakers I've ever met were people that were dyslexic, but found interesting, creative ways to go around that. And I thought, why doesn't anybody mention that? You see it as a vulnerability, but actually, if you play at people's strengths, you can extract so much value out of them.
Yeah.
Well, the expression, I think, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
Yeah, that's
it.
There
you
go. Exactly right. It was interesting. I was thinking back about, stereotypical symptoms of autism, or are there typical ones that you hear where you think, you roll your eyes and think, oh God, here we go again? I mean, you mentioned some of them, didn't you? Or certain language you think that people use that you think, oh no.
So there's definitely a stereotype that there's like the Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, in case anyone doesn't know what I'm referencing. And the boy who will line up his trains, or who can't make eye contact, the loner. And I think that's also one of the reasons that women get missed, because they girls are socialized from a very young age to behave in a certain way. Again, there's research into this, that if you think, we all know the phrase boys will be boys. You know, if a boy is being a bit boisterous, obviously boisterous being exactly that word, a masculine word, and, you know, wants to play on his own or however he wants to be, it's generally more let him be as a child. Whereas girls, very early on, it's like, you need to play nicely, you need to be a good girl, share, put others first. And you soon learn, because children are very perceptive, that you will be more successful socializing if you behave like everybody else. And so girls mask really heavily. And because of that, when girls get missed because they're not behaving in the stereotypical, you know, running around in circles, lining up their trains, obsessive interests in a very masculine areas, girls typically would have, you know, special interest is a common theme of autism, but a girl's special interest might be in her favorite boy band or in ponies. And because they're seen as girl interests, then, you know, they're just like, that's fine. And if girls have meltdowns, so a symptom of autism is meltdowns or shutdowns if you feel emotionally overwhelmed. If girls are taught that they're not allowed to do that because girls don't do that, they're more likely to hold it in. Whereas boys are more likely to just express themselves because it's more accepted. So if they're holding in those behaviors, a lot of it gets internalized and it becomes thought processes and like constant self-regulation. Constantly translating the world. And a lot of it has been historically, autism has been assessed on the inconvenience to other people as opposed to that person's own personal experience. And I think that's now changing to kind of capture more than just the stereotypes. Because, you know, a lot of us do make eye contact. I obviously make eye contact, though when I start thinking about it, I find it really weird.
Look at me in the eye now.
But you learn to do things. Everyone learns to do things they don't want to do. Otherwise, we'd all be babies lying on the floor, not walking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You said something interesting then that reminded me about another conversation that we'd had. And you did it, like I was saying to Tracy afterwards, you explained almost autism in the way you think, or when you're neurodivergent, you said it was almost like translating a language in your mind. So like Tracy and I speak Welsh, and I was thinking if you spoke Welsh as a first language and you were translating to English, you would take a moment to translate it. And that's the sort of what you said was it's like that. And that made me understand it so much better. I was thinking, oh yeah, okay. So if it is like you're not able to almost speak your normal language, you're having to just take a minute to think about it.
Definitely.
Yeah, it must be hard work.
It is very tiring. So there's a really good book called Why Can't I Just Enjoy Things by a comedian called Pierre Novelli, and he uses that analogy. And it is a really useful one to understand. And I've reflected on that more. I reflect a lot about this topic. It's as understandably as an interest of mine. And so I'm quite a literal person, and autistic people are quite literal. But when I think about it, I can explain myself to people with analogies and in a very non-literal, abstract way. So I wouldn't necessarily come across as literal on face value. But when someone's communicating back to me, I hear them in a very literal way. And that's much like if you know a different language, you might be able to really fluently speak that language. But if someone is speaking French with a colloquial dialect or speaking fast or using like phrases that you're not used to, you might be able to speak one way, but you hear it a different way. And again, that's I think why people get missed so much. And there's so much misunderstanding, which I can now see, which I never understood before, which is that people are experiencing conversations entirely different ways. And it is exhausting. And I find that when I was going through my difficult period last year, following my diagnosis, when it made me very tired. And the more tired I was, the more literal I became in my own language outwards. And I would have conversations with my manager sometimes, who fortunately was very okay with me being like that. And I would say, I just don't have any other words to say this. This is what I want to say. And it could be quite blunt. But so long as I'd provided context in advance, it was okay.
It's okay. Not going to offend anyone.
And it's interesting because with clients, you know, when you're in a meeting, you are being, as a neurodivergent person, you are spending a lot of energy making sure that you communicate in a really effective way. But you just can't do that all day, every day. It's exhausting. So you kind of drop that a little bit with colleagues, and then that's where you can sometimes have misunderstandings. But it is something called the double empathy challenge, which is where I don't understand those people and they don't understand me, and there's no one at fault. It's just about learning.
Just that mix in the middle.
Yeah.
God. And so have you worked with neurodivergent clients? I mean, Alina, you said you have.
Yeah.
And if you have you asked them directly if there were any changes in the workplace in terms of how we're advising them, anything different that we need to do to help them with the understanding or being comfortable in terms of like a meeting in the office? Or is there anything at all that any of you have done in that respect?
Yeah, I think for me, what those clients who have said, I am neurodiverse, is I've just asked them the simple question, well, how do you like to be communicated? That's the first point I go for.
Yeah.
And then more often than not, they're like, well, we just want a bit of structure. We just like to know what's the next step. Just keep me in the loop where everything is. Give me a time frame and basically stick to that.
Yeah.
So it's just having that open, but I think that's with any client anyway. It's like how what works best for you.
Yeah.
Don't just assume, well, this is the way it's done and everyone must follow it. Everyone's different. Some people like details, some people like bullet points, some people just like the one line.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've had clients when they are neurodiverse and it's like simply what works best for you.
Yeah.
I remember when a few clients mentioned to me how much of a game changer it was for them to have online meetings rather than coming to an office or meet somewhere, because again, the sameness for them is really important, and actually being put in environments where the lighting doesn't work, or they have to think twice about parking, or all the moving parts, and not knowing people, who am I going to meet, reception, greeting, this, that, or the other, noises, and lots of different elements. And at least when they talk to me through through Zoom or Teams or so on, they're on their own sofa in their own environment, in their own PJs sometimes, or the comfortable hoodie on, and they can be off on days, but we can have an honest conversation. I think that's game changer for them, because they don't have to put a front, they don't have to attune themselves to the environment they're planted in. They can just be themselves.
And it goes back to your analogy of the sugar.
Yeah.
That's
They don't need to use so many
Now
spoons.
I understand
it.
it.
Yeah.
What a powerful.
I've still got 10 available.
Yeah,
Exactly.
And actually, one more thing. You mentioned the dopamine thing, which I'd love you to keep talking about, because in the context of financial planning and financial coaching, you kind of expect from a reasonable person, with all the qualities they have, and obviously we talk to grown-ups most of the times, at least that's what they show up as. So you kind of expect to have a conversation and put a plan in place and follow that plan. And I find that with people who have ADHD, for example, there are most of the times they feel that they can't stick to the plan, especially when financial planning is framed as long-term, and they're like in the now.
Yeah.
Then I think that is a pivotal moment for anyone providing guidance or financial advice to actually really, really stop and scrutinize the way they talk to the person, the way they plan with the person, the way they hold them accountable for their actions, to kind of stick with the best spirit of intent, which is staying on track, delivering on those outcomes that they agreed on. But actually, how do you then accommodate this? How do you actually work with that client so they don't feel ashamed or withdraw from the process just because they feel misunderstood?
So that's something I've worked on with my therapist. So I still have therapy with this same lady since I got my diagnosis, to just work through everything that comes up. Therapy, I think, by the way, as a slight side tangent, is a really valuable thing to have. And it's something that people, I think there's a stigma attached to it, but we don't get a personal trainer. Well, hopefully we don't only get a personal trainer when we are, morbidly obese. We get a personal trainer because we want to keep ourselves in shape.
Yeah.
And I see therapy as a way to keep my mind in shape rather than struggling.
Yeah, I do it.
Do you?
I have done for probably the last 2 years, once a month.
It's
nice
brilliant,
to
isn't it?
spill everything and have a bit of guidance on maybe how to get out of certain things. And it's really valuable.
Sort the blind spots.
Yeah, it's
right?
really
Sometimes
valuable.
It's just
yeah,
and you have to find the right one who can challenge you in the right way. And
absolutely.
as I say, I'm lucky that the lady who I was referred to is skilled at working with people with autism and ADHD. So something that she and I worked on, and I think this has been mentioned already, with the dopamine. So with ADHD, there's a dopamine dysregulation. And when I'm having a particularly stressful time, as I was last year, and you're struggling to you're struggling, Vinted would have been my place to go. And I
Yeah.
would buy things because it would give me that instant gratification. I'm obviously a financial planner, so I know that, I should stick to a long-term plan, etc. And when I describe that, I think a really good analogy, and I love analogies, is that everyone knows how to go on a diet. But all the people who I know who go on diets regularly, they still like, I'm just going to have that glass of wine, or I'm just going to eat that piece of cake.
Yeah.
Because you can know exactly what you're supposed to do
Yeah.
and still not stick to it.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I'm in those difficult periods, she and I work on, what can you do to make the reward of not doing that immediate?
Yeah.
So first of all, it's like, before you buy that thing on Vinted, leave it for 10 minutes, come back to it. Did you really want it?
Yeah.
If you're feeling like you just want to get yourself out of that feeling, put your hands under cold water, because it just distracts it just changes your physiology. But also, if you want to lean into, and this is what I would typically do, is how bad will you feel after you bought that thing?
Yeah.
You might get that instant hit of dopamine, but like 10 minutes later, you're not going to feel good. So let's not talk about your long-term plan.
Yeah.
In 10 minutes, you're going to feel rubbish if you do that. So let's not do that other thing in 5 minutes time.
Yeah.
And actually just having that understanding of that like instant reward cycle that ADHD people have can help with the conversations you're having with clients.
Yeah. This is where the HALT framework really works. Understanding when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired is when you are at your most vulnerable. And especially when you are in that space where you get the sugar rushes, the spikes, it's really good to just look at the patterns and when am I at my vulnerable, and what else can you do to distract yourself from it? And I agree. A lot of the clients say, I need to remember when I felt really rubbish about, because there is a pattern, because there is always a go-to, a glass of wine or a bit of chocolate or whatever. It's usually something that you feel really bad about, because otherwise, it's not like the good stuff that linger in your system. Is usually the stuff that brings you like fleeting joy, but also it comes with a healthy dose of or an unhealthy dose of guilt or shame, right? So it's remembering the after, but also I think one of the things that really can work as a strength is that ability to obsess over things. It's like fixate, and once you put your mind to it, there's a healthy dose of discipline that comes with it. And just with the client that I mentioned before, just pivoting, kind of refocusing to a place where that obsession actually serves the really positive purpose, and actually drive that energy and enthusiasm out of that, and continue to feed your dopamine through that. It's almost like, this is like, it becomes the focus of your universe. And I think there are ways to is obviously like dosage and try to, it's going to be a trial and failure, because it's not going to be enough. Your mind is always going to tell you, no, but you've tried that worked, that glass of wine really hit the spot. Why try something else? And this is why diets don't work, is because your system looks after you as a way to survive. And the survival is to do sometimes with unhealthy habits, right? It's the quick release. So with the money behavior, I find, especially with the neurodivergent clients, it's a journey, but it's not impossible. And it's actually working with the client material to kind of go, look, you're here. It's like we're trying to make the best outcome with the resources that you have. Let's work with that. Not what you think the society should be expecting of you. The shoulds and woulds and coulds. I think, Tracy, you nicely talked about that. The whole set of disempowering rules. No, it's your rules on your own terms. Like, how does that look like?
Yeah, you're right. So to finish off then, if you all had like a top tip in terms of making neurodivergent people feel inclusive in the workplace, what would your top tip be? And also clients that we're working with.
For me, it would be think inclusive by design, which I know I covered earlier.
Yeah.
It's just a great philosophy. But in terms of my clients, I send all my clients a meeting agenda up front for every meeting, so that they know what to expect. And that's helpful for everyone so that they can prepare, but particularly the people who are overwhelmed if they don't know what's going to happen. So they don't have to feel like they're getting special treatment. They're just getting what they get.
Everyone gets.
I would just say there's no one right way.
Yeah.
And just don't have that assumption.
Yeah.
Some people want structure, some want flexibility, some like things visual, some wants written.
Yeah.
So having that communication with the client to kind of go, what works best for you?
Yeah. So don't assume.
Do not assume.
Ask the question.
Yeah.
Fab.
And always don't assume you know your client until you don't. Because for me, it was a life-changing moment when I spoke with Hazel, and all of a sudden the light bulb moment went. Well, you just assume you know somebody. And especially, I mean, not so much in coaching, because we tend to have short relationships, because we tend to just hand them a set of things and off you go, it becomes self-sufficient. But with financial planning, because you have long-term relationships, you could be with a client for years and assume you know them, and all of a sudden both you and your client get to the point where you don't understand what's going on. And just shaking that assumption off and looking at that client with fresh eyes, I think that's massively important. And in a similar fashion, as an individual, to give yourself permission to look at your situation with fresh eyes and embrace the change, and put your hand up and say, look, something doesn't feel quite right. I've noticed certain things, certain patterns about me. Help me make sense of it, and work with somebody to make sense of things.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Just for businesses who have neurodivergent colleagues, if your colleagues are open to this, use their knowledge. So I had a situation last week where one of my financial planning colleagues is working with a neurodivergent person, and she called me and asked how I would approach this situation. And I had a conversation about being direct and communication contracting, and then said, well, how would you approach it? And then she said what she would say. And I said, well, when I say being direct, this is how direct I mean. And I gave her an example of what I would consider direct communication. Yeah. And she was like, oh, that's very direct. And it was just the fact that, people even have a different interpretation of what those words mean. Yeah. And I said, everyone's different. But if you ask her if you can be direct, and then you have that direct conversation, clarity is kindness to neurodivergent people. Yeah. Because we're already having to translate the language. So clarity is kindness is one of my mantras at the moment.
Yeah, it's a good one.
But using the knowledge of your people in your team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. I think the only thing I would add probably is just the education piece, which I think has come up in each podcast that we've done. Hallie had an autism awareness day at her school recently, and ever since she's looking and really studying the children she's in school with and saying, do you think that person's autistic because they do this, or do you think that she's curious about it, which I think is really lovely. But also having the policies and work again and the training on a regular basis, I think. But thank you so much, ladies, for all being so honest and brave today, sharing your experiences. It's been a really good episode, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
A huge thanks to Alina, Hazel and Tracy for joining me on the Wealth and Women podcast, and to you for listening. To find out more, you can find useful links in the show notes. You can also explore related articles and more podcast episodes on the Personal Finance Professional website, many of which can be recorded as CPD and logged directly on the site with a click. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Until next time, goodbye.